We're going to talk about fossils today, the fossil record, different kinds of things we can find out. Fossils give information about extinct species. They vary widely, and they only form under certain conditions. So it's very feasible, like I've been saying, that we're looking at one piece of a 500-piece puzzle and we're trying to determine the picture from that. It's estimated that most of the organisms that have lived on Earth were not fossilized. Some different examples of fossils: they can be well preserved, entire animals with all the soft body tissues as well. They can be tiny, like bacteria, embryos, pollen grains. They can be fragments of an organism, teeth, pieces of a jawbone, bits of leaf. There are what we call trace fossils: casts of footprints, burrows, tracks, droppings. Most fossils are in sedimentary rock. Some are fossilized, preserved in fossilized tree sap, which is called amber. Fossils are formed in this way. Sedimentary rock forms when small particles of sand, silt, clay, or lime muds settle to the bottom of a body of water. The sediment builds up, buries the dead organisms that have sunk to the bottom. The remains are buried deeper and deeper, and then water pressure compresses the lower layers, turns the sediments into rock. And then through the process of erosion, those preserved remains may be later discovered and then studied. Most of the time, like I said, soft body structures decay quickly, so we mostly see only hard parts. Those hard structures are preserved if they're saturated or replaced with mineral compounds. If the fossilization process happens quickly, then we can see those soft tissues protected from decay, and you can see well-preserved fossils. We see the fins here on this fish fossil, as well as the hard part of the backbone. Paleontologists are the ones that study fossils. They make inferences from these structures about evolutionary relationships and form hypotheses about how body structures and species have evolved. Trace fossils like footprints can give us clues about locomotion. Plant leaves and pollen can suggest whether the area was a certain type of ecosystem. So researchers can try and piece together a lot of information based on the fossil record. Now, how do they determine how old things are? Relative dating places rock layers and fossils into a temporal sequence. Remember, that word temporal refers to time. So we're looking at these different locations, and we're looking at specifically index fossils. So we'll look at a specific fossil. Take this one for instance right here. We find it in location 1 and in location 2, and say that location 1 is Asia and location 2 is Europe. So what scientists do is they say, okay, this same fossil was found in these two different locations, so since it's found in that same layer, we are going to infer that those rock layers are around the same age. That's relative dating, literally looking at the relationships between different organisms. There are criteria for index fossils. They have to be easily recognized, occur in only a few rock layers, so meaning the organism only lived for a short period of time, but these layers have to be found in many places. Trilobites, they kind of look like roly-poly bugs, are useful as index fossils. Radiometric dating is a little more precise, a little more quantitative rather than qualitative. We look at radioactive isotopes, which you're going to do quite a bit next year in chemistry. These radioactive isotopes decay into non-radioactive isotopes at a steady rate, and depending on the element we're talking about, decays at a different rate. That rate is called a half-life. It's the time required for half of the radioactive atoms in a sample to decay. After one half-life, half of the original atoms have decayed. After another life, another half has decayed, and so on and so forth. And like I said before, different elements have different half-lives, so they decay at different rates. It's a good slide. Not sure why I didn't erase this one, but that's okay. Moving along. Carbon-14 has a short half-life, so it can date young fossils. It's a radioactive form of carbon that's naturally found in the atmosphere. It's taken up by living organisms. Remember, living things have to have carbon. So it's taken up by living organisms along with regular carbon, non-radioactive carbon, so it can be used to date material that was once alive, such as bones or wood. After an organism dies, carbon-14 in its body begins to decay to nitrogen-14, which escapes into the air. So researchers compare the amount of carbon-14 in a fossil to the amount of carbon-14 in the atmosphere, which is generally constant, and that reveals how long ago the organism lived. The half-life here is 5,730 years, so it can only date fossils up to about 60,000 years in age. For fossils older than 60,000 years, or rock that's older than 60,000 years, we estimate the age of rock layers and infer that fossils are roughly the same age as those rock layers. Look at elements with long half-lives to date very old fossils. The most common, potassium-40, has a half-life of 1.26 billion years, and uranium-238 has a half-life of 4.5 billion years. Like I said before, these elements with long half-lives, like potassium-40, are used to what we call indirectly date older fossils. You date the rock layers that the fossils are found in, and then you make an inference that that's how old that particular organism is as well. Here's the geologic time scale. It's not anything you're necessarily going to have to memorize. You're not going to have to memorize the whole thing. But the basic divisions of the time scale are eons, eras, and periods. And what you see these all kind of up here at the top. Eons, eras, and periods. So back to relative dating, they placed Earth's rocks and fossils in order according to their relative age, and they saw changes in the fossil record at boundaries between certain rock layers. So that's where they made the breaks in the geologic time scale. Then radiometric dating, once it was perfected, was added on to get more specific with the rock layers and the ages of the rock layers. The Cambrian period began 542 million years ago and continued till 488, which makes it 54 million years long. The Cretaceous period was 80 million years long. So it's not a regular pattern. It's not set intervals. It's really based on the fossil record and how the fossil record has changed. There are 4 eons. That's the widest time schedule right here, of unequal length. You have the Hadean eon down at the bottom, which is when the Earth began, or when they think the Earth began, about 4.6 billion years ago. The Archean, when life first appeared, began about 4 billion years ago. Proterozoic eon, 2.5 billion years ago, and lasted until 542 million years ago. So that's a really big jump. And the Phanerozoic eon continues to the present. So that's a huge wide band here. Eons are divided into eras. You can see those right here. And then eras are subdivided into periods, time periods, which range in length from nearly 100 millions of years to just under 2 million years. So then you see the time periods right next to the eras. Naming of these different chunks of time, they started naming before any rocks older than the Cambrian period had been identified. So all of geologic time before is the Cambrian is called Precambrian time. It's interesting because the Precambrian, that's not really split up into anything, is about 90% of Earth's history. This is a great depiction of Earth's, what scientists think Earth's history looks like. This is a 24-hour clock. So Precambrian time, 22 hours. And then you can see right here, you know, we're the most important things on this, obviously humans. Humans, if we were right there at the 0 hour, so to speak, 11:58:43. So the last minute and 17 seconds of a 24-hour day is how long humans have been on Earth, relatively speaking. The Earth and its climate has been constantly changing over time, and organisms have evolved in ways that have responded. The fossil record shows these changes for groups of organisms, how they've responded to changes on Earth and how they've changed Earth themselves. Climate's one of the most important aspects of the physical environment. There have been dramatic changes that have been triggered by fairly small shifts in global temperature. The heat wave of the Mesozoic area, the temperatures were only 6 to 12 degrees Celsius higher than they were during the 20th century. The Ice Age, world temperatures were only about 5 degrees Celsius cooler than they are now. Doesn't sound like a whole lot, but these small temperature shifts can change the shape of life on our Earth, and they have in the past, according to the fossil record, or what we see. Geological forces have transformed life on Earth. Mountain ranges and moving continents, volcanoes have altered landscapes and formed islands. There are wind and ocean currents that contribute to climate, geological features such as mountains and islands. Plate tectonics, you may have heard of before. All of our land masses are floating on these plates they're floating on the molten core, the liquid middle of our Earth. And that's called continental drift. Over the long term, scientists think that these continents have collided to form supercontinents and then they split apart. It's almost like bumper cars. You can see right here how scientists think that South America and Africa fit together at one point. And this is through the different periods, and then here's how we see things looking right now in the present day. When land masses are colliding, that's how mountain ranges rise up. When continents change position, ocean currents change their course. And both of these kinds of things can affect local and global climate. Continental drift has affected distribution of fossils as well. As continents have drifted apart, they carried organisms with them. South America and Africa are now widely separated. They got the Atlantic Ocean between them. Fossils of Mesosaurus, a semi-aquatic reptile, have been found in both. So that suggests that South America and Africa were joined at one time. Again, I remind you, no one was there. This is a guess, it's a hypothesis, based on the evidence that we have. There's evidence that suggests that giant asteroids have crashed into Earth over time. Scientists think that these kinds of collisions would toss up so much dust it would blanket Earth, would block out sun, cause global cooling, also would block out the sun for photosynthesis for plants, and that could have contributed to worldwide extinctions that we call mass extinctions. Activities of organisms have affected global environments. Earth's early oceans contained large amounts of soluble iron and little oxygen. But then photosynthetic organisms came on the scene. They produced oxygen gas and removed large amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. This reduced the greenhouse effect, cooled the globe. The iron content of the oceans fell as iron ions reacted with oxygen to form solid deposits. Organisms today shape the landscape by building soil from rock and sand and cycle nutrients through the biosphere.